We will make a start, and hello everyone. Welcome to this SDG Group End session. I am Farah Azmat, and a very good morning, a good afternoon, or good evening to you, depending on which part of the world you're joining this session from. And I am joining you from Deakin Business School in Melbourne, Australia, where it's roughly 11:35 p.m. in the night. Okay. So before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from where we join today, and we pay our respect and homage to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Okay. So for a quick introduction about myself, I'm an associate professor in the Department of Management in Deakin Business School in Melbourne. My main research interest lies in the area of sustainability, very passionate about SDGs. I have also, contributed as a research team lead for the SDG Blueprint that we'll be talking about today. And I manage the Prime portfolio and Deakin Business School with my wonderful colleague, Harsh Suri. And Harsh will be co-conducting the session. We will be co-conducting the session today. So I will briefly hand it over to you, Harsh, for a very quick say hello to the participants, and then I will take it back. Okay. Is that okay, Harsh?
Hello. Sure. Thank you, Farah. I'm Associate Professor Harsh Suri from Deakin Business School. So my research focuses on evidence-informed policy and practice, and particularly I focus on issues of inclusion and exclusion. So whose perspectives get privileged and whose perspectives don't get privileged. Alongside Farah, I lead the portfolio of integrating SDGs into curriculum. And like with Farah, I co-authored the SDG Blueprint document as the lead of curriculum team. So Farah,
Okay,
perhaps we could quickly go around and get everyone to introduce themselves.
Yeah, that'll be great, actually. Yes. Yeah.
So
we start with Eric, because I can see you, Eric.
And then perhaps, Eric, you could handball it to the next colleague that you find on your screen.
Okay, great. So I'm Eric Foley. I'm at Penn State University, the Smeal College of Business. I'm the director of our Center for the Business of Sustainability. We've also done a lot of work to integrate these things across the curriculum. So excited for the session. Thank you so much. And let's see, how about Monica?
Hey. I'm Monica Twinar. I'm with the Center for Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell University in upstate New York in the US. And so our focus for our center is on the strategic implications of sustainability for business, and work primarily with MBA students. So I'm so glad to be here, and I'm going to pass it off to Helen.
Hi all, my name's Helen. Apologies, I've got some internet connection problems, but I'll stay as much as I can. I'm with the Centre for Research into Sustainability at Royal Holloway University of London. We use the SDGs both as a focus for our teaching, but also as a centre in order to connect our research within the business school with other researchers across the university. So I'm interested in learning more about how others do that and the use of the blueprint. I'll pass it over to Luciana.
Hi everyone, I'm Luciana. I work in Novus BE at the Leadership for Impact Knowledge Center here. Apart from Nova also integrating the SDGs, at the moment we are thinking about creating more corporate sustainability offers, also integrating the SDGs. So I'm looking forward for this talk, and I'm going to pass it over to Sabine.
Hi everyone, I'm Sabine Deer. I'm the Managing Director for the Institute for Integrated Management at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. So it's about 9:30 in the morning here. I'm very interested. I've only joined as Managing Director of the faculty maybe 3 months ago, but the SDG component is very important in the teachings of for our students. And one of the things I'm quite interested in is how do we incorporate SDGs meaningfully, rather than just simply listing them off, because the student population that I work with is very informed, but how do we keep the SDG conversation interesting and meaningful, and how do we keep them engaged? Because I get the sense that the students that I'm dealing with now have been learning about this since high school. So I'm really curious to hear about ideas around that. Sorry, I'm going to pass it over to Barb.
Barb.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Barb Altman. I hail from Austin, Texas. I'm on the faculty of the College of Business Administration at Texas A&M University Central Texas, which is an hour north of Austin in Killeen. My colleague Jody Fry, also with our same university, is on this call, and I'll pass it to him afterwards. We have really jumped into the sustainability sphere with relatively new. This is our third year of master's for leadership for sustainability. So heavily been involved in curriculum development. We've done our best to try and integrate the SDGs as well as we can, but of course we would love more ideas, or willing to share what we've done. I specifically, my research has always been in public-private partnerships, corporate community relations, working across sector boundaries. And I have designed a new graduate class in our program on cross-sector partnerships. So my specific interest is on partnerships, and Jody and I are endeavoring into a whole new research project around leadership skills for partnerships. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Jody.
Well, Barb just stole all my thunder. I'm not sure what left I have to say. I am program director of our Masters of Science of Leadership for Sustainability, and I'm also chairman of the board of the One Planet Education Network, which is headquartered out of Geneva. And we're always looking for colleagues and fellows who are interested in coming together for, sharing and education offerings. And our whole effort is about finding where change agents for sustainability congregate. So, I'll put my email in the chat if you're interested for that. And my area of interest has been leadership for many, many years. I've done work on bringing spirituality to the workplace. How can we, create purpose and a sense of loving, caring culture? And what does leadership look like for that? And I believe that's what's really needed in the arena of sustainability. And so my focus has moved to bring that into global leadership for sustainability. And let's see, Erica.
Hi there. Sorry, my connection keeps going in and out a little bit. Nice to see everybody here. I'm at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, where I co-direct a toddler Center for Business Ethics and Social Responsibility. Just started programming and initiatives about 3 years ago and was founded 4 years ago. And I'm interested in a lot of things in my research that touches in these areas, but as a center co-director right now, we're trying to balance the various interests of various stakeholders, from university leadership to the donor, to trying to be more transdisciplinary across a highly siloed university. So I look forward to this session. Oh, sorry. And did I see, sorry, let me see. I'm just going through my Vency.
Hi. Hi, yeah, I'm joining you from Germany, from Dresden. I am the coordinator since 3 months, I think, of a small sustainability center here at the Technical University at Dresden. And I'm looking for interesting ideas to integrate the SDGs more into our curriculum. Yeah, thank you.
Is there anyone left, or?
I'm just wondering, I don't know.
I think I might be the one. I'm still here. I do apologize. I have issues with my connectivity, so I'm not going to turn on my video. My name, I'm Zera. I lead the Center for Business and Society at the Suleiman Daoud School of Business at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. And a bit like what Erika said, we are a fairly we are a university which have traditionally worked in our own little silos. So the center is structured around the SDGs, and we do try and inculcate a lot of cross-disciplinary work, but we haven't really worked on integrating SDGs into the curriculum so far. But we are developing research clusters around SDGs, trying to make, and these research clusters include practitioners as well as nonprofits from the industry and the public sector. So we're trying to bring in a lot of different perspectives from around practice and research. So that's pretty much what the center does. And I personally work in the areas of renewable energy, especially distributed networks, and also water resource management within industry. So my work is around 2 SDGs as well. I'm really pleased to be here.
Yeah, I think
That
everyone.
leaves Sarah. I think Sarah from Calgary.
Yeah, I'm lost. Hi, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, all the things. My name is Sarah. I'm a student at the University of Calgary. I've been doing a little bit of research on PRME and the Sustainable Development Goals. And at the University of Calgary, we have a Center for Corporate Social Responsibility, which we want to revamp and do better and be more exciting. So yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
Anyone else that's left, or I think we have covered everyone.
Farah.
Yes, yeah, exactly. What a wonderful and a diverse group of participants, Harsh. We're super excited to have you guys. You are so diverse, but I can see that we all have a common theme of SDGs and sustainability, and that's why we are all here. So let's get started, right? So I'm going to share my screen here. Yeah. Okay. So in this session, we have 2 main purposes, right? Number 1 is that we will introduce you to the SDG Blueprint that we have developed. And this SDG Blueprint is a roadmap or a guide that will help business schools to embed SDGs across their curriculum, research, and partnerships. So we'll introduce that SDG Blueprint. And secondly, we will try to explore how you in your business schools are embedding SDGs across curriculum, research, and partnerships. And
we're getting a blank screen. Farah, we're getting a blank screen. I think we're not getting see your PowerPoint slides.
You can't.
I could see it.
I can see it too.
You can see it?
Yeah.
Can you see that? Okay. Can everyone see that? Okay,
I was able to see it too. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Great. So there are two purposes of this presentation: introducing the SDG Blueprint, and then just discussing about how you in your business school are embedding SDGs across curriculum, research, and partnership. So it's going to be a fun session, right? So what is this SDG Blueprint? What are we talking about? So the SDG Blueprint is an outcome of the 3rd Prime Champion Cycle, 2018 and 2019. And for those who do not know Prime, I'll just talk about Prime in a very briefly, that Prime is a global community of business schools. And the main purpose of Prime is to transform management education to responsible management education and to develop our students as responsible future leaders, right? And since the announcement of SDGs in 2015, Prime's vision has been to deliver responsible management education by embedding SDGs across curriculum, research, and partnership. And Prime is heavily dedicated to SDG, and this is reflected in the fact that we produced that SDG Blueprint document in the 3rd Prime Champion Cycle. So this document was officially launched last year in United Nations Prime Global Forum in June, I think June 2020. And as you can see that, this blueprint is co-authored by a number of authors across different countries, but also different continents. So we had authors from UK, from Sweden. We had Harsh and I was there from Melbourne. We had Christian from Switzerland and Jill Bogie from South Africa. We had late Mark Meany from US, and we had Nikolai from Prime Secretariat in New York, US. So we thank all the members of the Blueprint, particularly late Mark Meany, because he passed away last month, and we pay our respect and we greatly value his contribution to this Blueprint. So, so what is this Blueprint? So as I said, it's a roadmap, it's a guide that it's a potential guide that will help business schools to embed SDGs across curriculum, research, and partnership. So it is a semi-static document, which means that it has a scope for continuous improvement. Okay. If you look at the blueprint, and Harsh, if you could just, post the link for the blueprint in the chat, that would be great. So if you look at the blueprint, we'll find that we have got 5 sections in the blueprint. In the section number 1, we talk about just very introductory stuff about SDGs, why they're important for business and business schools. In the second section, we talk about how can business schools contribute towards achieving the SDGs. In the third section, we come up with different enabling factors that help in mainstreaming SDGs across business schools. And we come up with a very simple framework that we will discuss in today's in a session in a few minutes. In the fourth section, we talk about different frameworks, different tools. We talk about practical examples that business schools are using across the world to embed SDGs, right? And the fifth section is under development. And the notion is that we will develop an online repository. And this repository will have 3 components, one for curriculum, one for research, and one for partnership. So once that's up and running, so all the prime signatory business schools will have that opportunity to upload their or share the best examples of embedding SDGs across curriculum, research, and partnership. So it will be a very good online tool for sharing and learning from each other. Because we are constrained for time, I will very quickly just dive into the 4 key enablers factors that we identified and absolutely important for mainstreaming SDGs across business schools, be it curriculum or research or partnership. So number 1, I would say that simultaneous top-down and bottom-up commitment. And I would like to focus on the word simultaneous here. So we need to have both top-down and bottom-up commitment. We just can't have one or the other. We need to have both of them. If we want to have SDGs integrated, if we want to have SDGs being institutionalized in the institution's values, in their missions, in their vision, then we need to have both top-down and bottom-up commitment. For example, if we just have bottom-up commitment, SDGs will still remain very much at the periphery and they will not be integrated into key documents and vice versa. And the second enabling factor, what we identified was to identify the crucial processes and responsibilities. And what we mean by this is that, we want to highlight that, that embedding SDGs by business school is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Every school has a different journey, and every school has to create their own journey based on their own needs, based on their own capability, based on their own context. So there's no right or wrong way, and the SDG Blueprint just provides you some examples of how business schools are actually, embarking on this journey. So we'll talk about some processes and responsibilities that business schools have to adopt, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. And the third step would be like, organizations or business schools need to come up with explicit goals. And by this, we mean that business schools should ideally align their business goals with SDGs. If they can do that, then it will foster shared objectives. It will get the buy-in from the staff as well, but also it will show the leaders' commitment toward the SDG agenda. And we also emphasize the importance of resource allocation. So this could be financial or this could be non-financial as well. And the fourth enabling factor would be that we came up was communication and coordination. Again, this is very important that, whatever SDG activities we are taking across curriculum, research, or partnership, we need to communicate with each other. We need to share these best practices and, and we need to learn from each other. So these are the 4 key enablers. And then we came up with this very simple, but I would say useful, basic framework for systematically integrating SDGs across curriculum, research, or partnership, right? So the first step would be to understand where we are. And what we mean by that is that first, organizations or business schools, they need to understand the 17 SDGs, and then they need to do a sort of mapping, like, where do they start in terms of contributing to the 17 SDGs? What are their strengths? What are the potential gaps? Where are they lagging behind? And they have to do a mapping. And we'll talk about how business schools engage in mapping in the next few slides. So this is the first step, like understanding where we are in terms of embedding SDGs. So after we have done this step, we will have an idea about what are our strengths in terms of SDG, how can we leverage those strengths, what are our gaps, and based on that, we can come up with our priorities, and we can come up with different goals, right? And after that, we could actually deepen or broaden SDG integration. So this is something which is like, which depends on individual schools. So there is no one best way. It depends on the school's context, like, whether they should go ahead with broadening SDG integration. By broadening, we means like, embedding a large number of SDGs, or whether they should just focus on 1 or 2 SDGs, but trying to look at it in depth. So there's no, again, there's no one best way. It depends on the school's context, depends on their own needs, their own capabilities. But one thing I would like to stress here that, if you are working with SDGs, you might have realized that SDGs are all very interconnected. They are SDG synergies and tradeoffs. And if we are looking at SDGs, it makes sense to have a more in-depth knowledge so that we could actually leverage the synergies, and we could also address the trade-offs that might happen on the way. And the fourth step is the communication in continuous improvement. And this goes like a cycle. So this is a very basic framework of what schools can do in terms of systematically embedding SDGs across curriculum, research, or partnerships. As I said, embedding of SDGs across business school is a strategic journey, and it requires a commitment on different levels. For example, like, we need to have commitment from individual academics, we need to have commitment from department or school level, and also from business school level at the top level, right? And this just reinforces the fact that we need to have both top-down and bottom-up commitment. In terms of mapping, like how we said in the step 1, we need to understand where we stand in terms of SDG, our contribution to SDG. We need to engage in a mapping methodology. A large number of business schools are actually engaged in mapping SDG. There are a number of ways that business schools are engaged in mapping, but the most common and the most simple way of mapping SDGs is by mapping the activities against the SDG icons, right? This is a very simple way. A large number of business schools are doing this mapping by this particular method, but this also is very subjective, right? A more advanced way would be to use mapping with the use of keywords. And what I mean by this is that, because if you look at SDGs, they don't come up with a set of keywords, right? So the notion here is that each business school creates a list of keywords that align with each particular SDG. And once they have created that list, they have to sort of content analyze their curriculum activities or research activities or partnership activities against this list. So this is an intermediately advanced step of mapping. And perhaps the more complex step would be, mapping the activities of curriculum, research, or partnerships against the SDG targets or indicators. Okay. Again, the mapping could be done in many different ways. It could be done across individual level, it could be done across departmental level, or it could be done across business or school level. On the other hand, it could be done across curriculum, research, and I think partnership is the one. Yeah, partnerships. And what we argue here that, we say that in order to systematically embed SDGs, there needs to be a consistent approach of mapping going on in all the units, For example, I'll give an example. For example, individuals in their annual performance report, they need to perhaps, report on how they are embedding SDGs across their curriculum, across the research, and across the partnerships. And this could be set in terms of department and school level as well. So if we can do this mapping in that way, then SDGs are likely to be more institutionalized, likely to be more integrated. Okay. Okay. So this is something like a very generic information about how to embed SDGs across curriculum, research, and partnership. How do we do the mapping, that sort of thing. But what I will do in the next few minutes is that I will dive more deeper into how can we embed SDGs across research and partnerships. And then after that, I will hand it over to Harsh, and Harsh will talk about how we can embed SDGs across curriculum. Okay. If you look at embedding SDGs across research, so this slide is actually based on existing literature and also the data that we collected from prime champion schools, right? So embedding of SDGs in research is very interesting, because if we look at business schools' approach to embed SDG, we find that there has been a huge emphasis on embedding SDGs across curriculum, but there has not been that much emphasis on embedding SDGs across research. So while this emphasis has started to grow, it still remains very fragmented. And we don't have a SDG-driven or a very coherent SDG-focused research strategy. And what I mean by this is that, if you look at business schools' research strategy, you will find that almost all business schools have a component of sustainability. And this focus on sustainability has been around even before the SDGs were announced in 2015. So all the business schools have been focusing on sustainability for a very, very long time, right? But what we find is that these business schools are not necessarily linking their sustainability strategy explicitly with SDGs. And this linkage is really important for a number of reasons. Number one, this linkage is important because it provides more meaning to sustainability, existing sustainability research. Number two, it's more important from a reporting purpose, right? And also, it shows more commitment. And number three would be it shows more commitment of the schools, that they are more committed towards SDG agenda. So this is a big issue that we found, but business schools are trying to have more SDG focused research strategy starting from now, but up until now, we didn't have that strategy that much, right? So if you look at business schools' approach, we find that they are adopting a number of approaches to embed SDGs across research. In some business schools, individuals are taking the lead. There are individual pockets of excellence. In some business schools, we have research centers, we have research groups, and some business schools are engaged in mapping of SDGs activities, right? In terms of mapping their research centers activity or mapping their individuals activity. So this is the kind of approach that we have seen in business schools. If we look at the current research focus, we find that because we do not have SDG focused coherent research strategy, what business schools are doing is that they're aligning their normal research outputs with SDGs. So whatever the research output is, they are trying to align with different SDGs rather than SDGs driving the research agenda. And some of the business schools, we found that they're focusing on understanding of SDGs. Some of them are localizing the SDGs. They're focusing on how do we make this big global goals local? How do we understand the goals in a local context, right? And some of the business schools, we found that they were trying to engage in research to integrate SDGs in the curriculum as well. So these were some of the current research focus that business schools were engaged in when we collected the data, right? But we also found that research has can play a more important role, has more potential to advance the SDG agenda. And number one, that's something that research needs to focus more is SDG synergies and trade-off. We know that SDGs are very interconnected, right? And because they're so interconnected, which means that they have synergies, they have trade-offs, and research has got a very critical role to play to identify the synergies so that we can leverage these synergies, and also to identify the trade-offs, right? So that we can address the trade-offs. I'm sure that you know that we would not be able to achieve the SDGs by 2030, not even by 2050, if we continue with the as usual business as usual activities. And the main reason for this is because of the inherent contradictions that we have within the SDGs. For example, like, if we focus on economic and social goals, that generally happens at the expense of the environmental goals, right? So we need to, like, we need to be, we need to be very careful about the trade-offs, right? And this is where research has a potential role to play. And this is something that research is lacking at the moment. And I also wanted to mention the term SDGs within the planetary boundaries. This is something that's gaining more prominence nowadays. And what we mean by planetary boundaries is that so this term planetary boundaries was actually, I think, coined in 2009 by the scientific community, Rockstrom et al. 2009. They came up with this idea of planetary boundaries. So they defined a safe operating space for the world for sustainable development. So they identified 9 key factors that we need to be aware of. For example, like, air pollution, ocean acidification, biodiversity loss, that sort of thing. 9 key factors that we need to be aware of when we are thinking about sustainable development. And by SDGs within the planetary boundaries, we mean that when we are focusing on SDGs, we need to be sure that we are operating within the safe operating space. We are not crossing that safe operating space. We are not stepping into the red zone, which causes irreversible damage to the earth. So that is the SDGs within the planetary boundaries, and a lot of research has started to focus on that now. And it'll be interesting to see whether you have come across this term as well. So research also has to play a very important role in coming up with new innovative models in terms of implementing and evaluation of the SDG agenda. Also data collection, storage, and analysis. This is something which is hugely lacking when it comes to developing countries, and research has a role to play in terms of adding knowledge to that. Another thing that we found, that impact assessment of SDG remains as a very nascent stage. So schools are, they are engaged in SDGs, embedding SDGs across research, but they are not actually, they do not have a very consistent approach in terms of assessing that impact. And this is something that's very important as well. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay? So these are some of the current trends that we find of business schools in terms of embedding SDGs across research. And so this is a figure that actually is coming straight from the SDG Blueprint. And this figure actually provides different options, like describes the different options which the school have in terms of embedding SDGs across research using a very simple matrix. So on one hand, the research activities could have a narrow focus, narrow SDG focus. They could focus on just 1 or 2 SDGs, or they could have a broad focus, covering a large number of SDGs. On the other hand, research activities could be undertaken by individuals, or they could be taken by groups of individuals, as happens in case of research centers or research groups. So we could find that business schools can adopt a number of options simultaneously. Okay, so number 4th option is the preferred one here, because this is one where business schools have actually integrated SDGs as the integral part of the key research document. They are engaged in interdisciplinary collaborative research, both within and outside the institution. So this is a sort of aspirational quadrant, right? On this point here, I will just ask you to reflect on just reflect on your own business school's approach of embedding SDGs. Is your business school focusing on, on collaborative research, for example? Like, I know that Zera talked about research center, and a lot of you talked about research centers, so that should be an example of collaborative research. In some business schools, there might be individual people, high profile researchers who are working on a number of SDGs. So just have a think and reflect on what sort of approach your business school is adopting. And we'll talk about that in a minute later. Maybe if you can get to the breakout rooms. So in the SDG Blueprint, you will find examples, practical examples of all of these four options, right? So based on that, some of the key areas to consider for research, embedding SDGs across research would be, we still find that there's a need for building awareness. We find that even in business schools, there are still individuals who do not understand how to connect their research with the different SDGs, so there needs to be that sort of awareness built. And this awareness is also very important for both top-down and bottom-up commitment, right, to institutionalize SDGs. Resources are important, as I said, financial and non-financial. We also found that incentivizing and prioritizing SDG research is important. This is something that not many business schools are doing at this stage. And this is something that's important to motivate more staff to engage in SDG research. Multi-stakeholder partnerships is really important as well, so that we could get a more holistic perspective. And I also wanted to stress on this fact of regular SDG reporting and impact measurement assessment. And this is really important because business schools are, they are taking SDG activities, but we really need to understand what sort of impact that activity is having. Are they only having an academic impact, or are they having an economic or social or environmental impact? So that thing needs to be reported, and that needs to be documented as well. Right. And also, because the SDGs are so interconnected, there's a need for systems thinking, and we need to have a cross-disciplinary approach if we want to embed SDGs across research. Okay, so these are some of the very in a nutshell, what we had for SDG, embedding SDGs across research, but I'm very happy to answer any questions once I finish the slides. So this was about the research. Now moving on to the partnerships, what we have in the blueprint is, so SDG partnerships is SDG 17, a very important goal, as we all know. So this slide particularly talks about the what of partnerships, what, right? So what means what type of partnerships we have at business schools. Again, there's a very simple matrix. So this type of partnerships could either have a narrow focus on SDGs or a broad focus on SDGs. On the other hand, this partnership could be, focused on teaching. This could be focused on research, or this could be focused on community engagement. So this is a sort of what sort of partnerships we have at business schools. But it's really important to understand how can we make these partnerships more engaging, more impactful, and more sustainable. And for that, we come up with this framework, of partnership sweet spot. And this partnership sweet spot is mainly saying that, we need to work towards the central point. And how do we do that? For example, individual faculty members who are driving the partnership initiatives, they need to be supported by the management, and this needs to be supported by the whole institution's agenda, and this needs to be supported by the societal goals, something that is coming from the external environment. So if you can align all of these four together, then that is the partnership sweet spot, and this is where the impact is going to be sustainable. It's going to be more, more impactful. So this is very briefly about the partnership. And again, we'll find in the blueprint, we'll find specific examples of all of these four options that I have briefly touched upon. And on this point, I will also ask you to just reflect on what sort of partnerships you have on your business school. Is it just led by individual faculty members, or do you have support from the management, or it's supported by the whole institution, or is it also supported by the SDG agenda, for example, right? So this is very brief, how to embed SDGs across research and partnership. And I will very quickly hand it over to Harsh to talk about, embedding SDGs across curriculum. So over to you, Harsh.
Thank you so much, Farah. If you could move to the next slide, please. And first of all, thanks to everyone for really contributing generously to the chat session. And some of the things that, I've picked up from the sessions, yes, the schools seem to have done it better than universities in some ways. So in Australia, we find that primary schools have integrated SDGs really well into their curricula, but high schools and universities are still a little bit lagging behind. And, you know, Jody, in relation to your paper about spirituality, there's lots of conversations are going around about how First Nations people and different religions, Eastern cultures got it really right. So, you know, the holistic notion of spirituality and growth, all that is so important now in terms of leadership for sustainability. And thank you so much, Eric, for sharing your wonderful resource. So I hope, please, all of you do share more resources on the Padlet. Because we're running we've got only 15 minutes left, so I'll briefly touch upon the curriculum choices. One of the things that we found is no one size fits all. And a very good example of this was recently at the Global United Nations PRME Global Forum. I was putting together a panel. And in Australia, what we find is with university education, we are very big on participation, improving participation and access, and the employability agenda is quite high. So other than students from our executive MBA, we find that everywhere there's a lot of emphasis on employability, and students are increasingly coming to university because they want to improve their career options. And so, you know, I just took it for granted. Of course, that's the reason. So I tried to propose a session across with colleagues from different continents about how it is so imperative to strengthen the nexus between employability and sustainability agenda. And immediately I got this perplexed colleagues from Canada and from some other places. And they said, you know, I don't think that's really important for our students because they already are doing pretty well in their business schools. And a lot of those were from elite business schools. It's not the career aspirations that's so high. So understanding what's it really your students' aspirations, who are your learners, what's the demographics, what are their aspirations, and not just what are their aspirations, how can you bring in sustainability into their aspirations is really important. We found some really good examples of different approaches. So there were pros and cons. So we kind of found that what Cito, PEMIS, and, you know, they were talking about in their JB, Journal of Business Ethics paper about different approaches. We found examples of all different approaches done really well, particularly suitable for specific examples. And we've shared those examples in the blueprint as well. But the next stage is we would be looking for more examples from all of you. I think at this point, I really did want to stop. And perhaps, Farah, if you could stop sharing the slides and we could go in the gallery mode and we could hear from colleagues, what are the various options that you are using? Or if you could share some examples that have worked particularly well in your school in terms of, you know, what are good examples for embedding SDGs into research, partnerships, or curriculum? Or perhaps what are the challenges or what are some effective strategies that you've used? Over to you all, please.
Or perhaps even, you know, I would just like to hear as well, like, you know, whether you guys have both top-down and bottom-up commitment. How many would have both top-down and bottom-up commitment? Can you please just share raise your hands in your school? Just reflect on your school strategy. Do you have your deans involved? Do you have all your staff or your colleagues involved as well?
I think if it's okay, I'll start just by saying that we have a strong sustainability focus within our student population. So our students have created, you know, sustainability networks and groups, and one of our, you know, there's a strong sustainability focus across Canada, and we've had students connect across different schools in the country. Which I find really impressive, you know, to go above and beyond everything else that you need to do as a business student. So we have a strong sort of bottom-up approach from students, and they hold us to high. There's a high degree of accountability. Our you know, separation from our investments in fossil fuels. A lot of that at the university level was driven by students, and it took a few years for it to actually reach to the top levels where decisions could be made. But there were, you know, protests and letter campaigns, and our students are very active in that. But at a faculty level, I find that there is a top-down approach because we are a member of the PRIME group. And so the fact that you have to write a report every 2 years, our dean has to sign off on this report, you know, that's compiled by many different people. It holds us to account too at a faculty level, and to consistently having to consistently tell the PRIME what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it, I think forces reflection on our end.
Thank you, Sabine. Thank you very much for that input. Anyone else would like to say anything about the business schools approach? Do you have top-down and bottom-up approach simultaneously, or?
Well, I can just add we're a little bit at the other end of the spectrum. So we, I often get undergrads who are outgoing seniors who've never heard of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So our student body, I think, is very much wanting to be engaged, but has not had the exposure the way certainly it sounds like in Canada students have. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that we're a total anomaly here in the United States. As far as top-down leadership and then kind of bottom or throughout among faculty, one of our charges as a center is to get us integrated with Prime. So we're, again, just at the very early stages of that. But generally, I think there will be faculty support, and we already have very strong dean support. University-wide, it's a different type of conversation, though.
Yeah. Thank you so much,
That's
Erica,
a very
for sharing
interesting
this.
point. Yeah, that's a very interesting point, Erica, what you've made about, university-wide engagement with SDGs. I think because of the international, I don't know, this is my impression from talking to colleagues, because of the international accreditation bodies like AACSB and EFMD, they all pretty much supported Prime. So the business schools I find are leading in lots of different places. So in ANZ area, Australia, New Zealand area, we find that really business schools are into SDGs. And we might find some kind of in arts and humanities, a couple of very small number of faculty, or in some of the sciences areas, like environmental sciences, they are into it. But again, I still feel that it's pretty much business schools that are leading it. Is that a similar experience in your universities?
I'll jump in and say that, but prior to joining the Faculty of Management, I was in our Faculty of Medicine. And I think for a lot of universities that have a Faculty of Medicine or a biomedical research arm, it's usually quite large, often affiliated with hospitals and multiple institutes. And having spent 15 years there, I can tell you that nobody knows anything about the SDGs. Very few students, it's not considered part of their training. They're so focused on biochemistry or biology 101. And then there's quite a lot of pressure in terms of just advancing your research in the biomedical field. There just doesn't seem to be a capacity to encourage discussion about SDGs. So it was only once I sort of made the transition over into the management faculty or the business school that this kind of hit me in the face. And it was surprising. So I agree, Erica, like university-wide, it's a very different story. Very, very different.
I can go next. And Jody can jump in if he has a different perspective than mine. Within the College of Business, we have been the biggest driver for this at our university, but it's interesting. Our relatively new dean is very supportive, came here with this as one of her action items. And our new strategic plan does have several strategic elements to integrate this more across the college, because the problem that we've had for the last few years is that we have 3 different departments within our college. Jody and I both sit in the Department of Management and Marketing. And in that faculty, there's total consensus and integration. However, other 2 departments, CIS and Accounting, Finance, and Economics, there is not. So it should be interesting in the next few years, because it's part of our new strategic plan to see whether that pushes integration or not.
Well, the only thing I would add to that is that, one of the key elements that comes through your presentation is that if it's not embedded into the reward system, it won't happen. The behavior that gets rewarded becomes actionable. And so our dean has begun to, I think, efforts in that regard. And if you're in a business school, we're in the middle or final phases of a AACSB accreditation. And of course, one of the main areas in the new AACSB is this whole partnerships, community, sustainability oriented goal. And she is really using that as a hammer, to justify, all of this. So, even accredited AA schools have to deal with this new goal. And so that may be one strategy to use if you're a AA school. So anyway, some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the international accreditations are playing a huge role, in driving this sustainability agenda, because, every business school tries to follow their, their guidelines on ethics, responsibility, and sustainability. I just wanted to know that in this participants, like with this group of participants, is there any business school that has got a SDG focused research strategy? We know that we have got sustainability strategy, but do you guys have any strategy that is driven by SDGs, like from the top, like an SDG focused coherent research strategy?
I would just share that at Penn State, SMEAL, in some ways, we just have the opposite of that.
Yes, that's what.
So
Yeah, that's the common thing.
We just had a meeting. In fact, I mean, we have about 30 faculty that do research in sustainability and social impact, and that's out of, I don't know, 120 faculty or something. And in fact, at a meeting, an annual planning meeting we just had 2 days ago, I can remember the faculty saying basically they appreciate our approach of not dictating what they should be researching. So there's not really any interest among our faculty who are already doing research in this topic to link it to SDGs or to say, no, we really need to be rallying around climate change, for example, or issues of racial equity or gender equity. They tend to react negatively to that, and they really they try to protect, which I understand culturally, their academic freedom. So our approach has been to support rather than impose.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that's the best way. But that's been our approach.
I think that's a very common approach that we find in business schools, Eric, and you are not alone. I can definitely say that, So because, there's a huge issue of academic freedom, which means that we need to allow people to do research in the areas that they want to do. We can't impose anything on that. But on the other hand, we really need to have that, because these people are doing research which contributes to different SDGs, but that's not being reported. You know what the point? So, so there is some, there's some need to link that SDGs there. That's what I think, that's something what research has been saying this. Yep. Anything about partnerships, like, what sort of partnerships you have at your particular school level? Or are you mapping your partnership activities? Mapping SDGs in your partnership activities?
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, even I shared in that major sustainability website that we've created over 3 years. We started just identifying what are the sustainability learning outcomes by major. That's how we started 3 years ago. Because we thought if we're going to teach students about sustainability in business, we should first identify what should we even be teaching them. And we realized that it's very different by discipline. And so that was the aha. It wasn't SDGs. It was more, okay, let's identify, because students identify and faculty identify with the major and the discipline. It's more of like I see it as a servant leadership approach, frankly, like starting with where people are and sort of subsuming your interests in service of whoever you're trying to help. And so I felt like SDGs were kind of this ideological hammer that I was like, I don't want to start with that, actually. I want to start with listening approach. And what we heard was, if I'm a faculty member in finance or accounting, or if I'm a student, that's where I live and work, and that's where I'm going to get my career. So it became for us all about defining the learning objectives and the career pathways by discipline and by major. And we haven't mapped any of that yet to SDGs on the curriculum side or on the research side ourselves. We do talk about SDGs, but we haven't gone through that mapping exercise ourselves, and actually kind of purposefully, because it may be in the US it's a thing, but I think in the United States, certainly among conservative people in business schools, I'll put it that way, the UN can kind of be looked at as maybe suspicious and it's over politicized, perhaps. So thanks.
That's actually a very interesting point, Eric, because, I've worked with a colleague. So, for example, I've got a colleague, lovely colleague from supply chain management, and we put it in a Masters of Information Systems. We integrated kind of sustainability agenda in a very genuine sense, where they go out to businesses and they source problems and they solve a sustainability problem. And then I said, would you integrate it with SDGs? He said, no, that will lead to curriculum crowding, which means that students wouldn't essentially kind of delve deep into it and try to find meaningful problems. Instead, they'll try to be tokenistic about integrating SDGs. And I just wanted to hear from other colleagues that have they experienced such experiences? So, and I've had so I work with faculty supporting them in integrating. And Jody, Eric, I found your approach quite meaningful. Listening often helps them. Yeah, you're already doing it. So the first thing I get is sustainability is not what I need to do. Go and ask my neighbor. It's not in my course. And then, by the time you start talking, what are you doing? And you kind of say, you're already doing it. Just do it a little bit more. And the gentle nudging leads to it. But then what I found was there's still a lot of resistance. Are other colleagues finding that as well towards SDGs? And maybe we need to continue having that healthy resistance. Yes, Rod.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to reflect on a couple of those issues. I think this question of resistance is one that, we've certainly seen to some degree, but we actually did so I'm at the Rotman School of Management, University of Toronto in Canada, and we did a survey of our faculty quite recently to understand to what degree the issues reflected in the SDGs were being taught in school. We'd previously done in our MBA program, we'd previously done a survey on sustainability related issues, and it showed that very little was being deliberately taught from a sustainability angle. When we asked about the SDGs, though, we found out that all of a sudden that all sorts of stuff was being taught that related to the SDGs. But Eric, your word around teaching outcomes, was it a deliberate outcome that we were intending to reach? And that was not the case. We were getting these very strange numbers relating to, were we covering these things in passing? Were they being discussed? Were there, individual cases that reflected on some of these issues? The answer to which was quite strong. But when it came down to, did this matter in terms of the outcomes of the courses, or were students being given a lot of latitude to explore these in broader ways, then there was very little of that. So that was a kind of a fascinating conundrum for us to face. And, similarly at the student level, I'd say, I heard someone mentioning before that their students would have said they'd heard very little about the SDGs, but when you said, have you heard about X, Y, or Z? Then they would say yes. Again, relating to the SDGs. So I think that the SDGs themselves as something that either faculty members or students are aware of is relatively low. When you get into some of the details, then there's more going on there. Nevertheless, I think there's still a huge way to go in terms of the degree to which we're actually intending to make those things important within the curriculum. I think they're at best kind of things that are being discussed kind of in tangents or in very specific cases rather than something that's specific to the curriculum. And I think that's not necessarily where most business schools are going, but if we want to be seen to be making progress in this area and want that to be reflected in our research or in our curriculum progress, then without spending a lot of time describing and discussing and teaching about the SDGs, I think it's going to be hard getting there.
I guess I'm just going to ask Rod, I'm at McGill, and one of the questions that I have then is, is it worth it then to try and corral all of this into the SDG framework, which is a criticism that I've received when I've asked for feedback, that there are other frameworks. If the subject matter is the same, but the framework is a little bit different, how hard do you have to work to really sort of beat people over the head in telling your professors, like, you must do it this way. Here are 17, little piles, figure out which one you fit into.
I think the challenge there for many of us, I've already heard some of it, is we're kind of fighting a couple of battles at once, and one is to the degree to which we want to integrate sustainability into the curriculum is sort of where, at least at U of T, we've placed our emphasis. The SDGs would be sort of one step beyond that. And I know for those of us who are really familiar with these things, that's kind of a ludicrous distinction. In some sense, these are the same things. But the degree to which the faculty and to even some degree the students are familiar with them we're wanting to take that one step at a time. So is it worth it? Ultimately, I mean, I have all sorts of opinions about which frameworks are best and how these frameworks evolve and blah, blah, blah. But the degree to which we're working with where our audience is at and trying to move them along, I think that is kind of the thing that makes sense for us at the moment.
Sabine, in some courses where I've had successes kind of trying to help students understand that there are pros and cons. So they're kind of, often when we find that you ask students, okay, is your strategy that you're proposing or a marketing plan or whatever you're proposing, how does it rank, or how would you kind of evaluate it against ERS criteria? And that's where, when we provide them with the SDG framework, we say, now think of the pros and cons, not just the positive effect, but also the negative effect. That's somewhere where we think students are meaningfully engaging with it.